Culture Crew, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Kulture Kids Storytime. So I'm really sad, you guys. This week, we are diving into the final chapter of the book, Heart and Soul by Kadir Nelson. This has been an amazing journey to talk to you about Black history in America. So there's so many things we talked about between slavery, Reconstruction, Abraham Lincoln, inventors, Dr. Joe Louis, Dr. King, just all of these different aspects of our story as it relates to the last few hundred years. But as you're thinking about that, one thing I want to make very clear is that this interrupted our history. Our history is so much more than just what you see in this book and what America presents to you. Our history goes back to the kings and queens and pyramids in Egypt, also known as ancient Kemet. It goes back to, Mesopotamia, all of these different areas. So when you look at Black history, it's actually world history. There's not one aspect of history that we don't have a hand in. We're not always talked about. We're not always praised for our contributions. But no, if you dig deep enough, you will see us there. So I encourage you to have these conversations with your parents, ask questions about these different topics in this book, and find out as much as you can and be hungry. Want to know your story, understand who you are and where you come from. It's so important and so empowering. So with that said, let's dive into chapter 12, Revolution. We knew we were going to change the world. Angela Davis, revolutionary. Something good had started in Montgomery, and it spread all across the country. Young people grabbed hold of the movement the grown folks had started and took it over. To show how different they were from their parents' generation, they started wearing their hair long, and their clothes became louder and more colorful. And the music, honey, the music was even louder and more soulful. The sounds of angry electric guitars and powerful drums echoed through our neighborhoods as we sang along with James Brown. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And Sam Cooke, a change is gonna come. College kids started to challenge the segregation laws, starting with the Woolworths Cafe in Greensboro, North Carolina. 4 Black students just went in there and sat down at white folks' lunch counter. They were later put in jail, but people heard about it and started doing it all over the South. Going into whites-only movie theaters, pools, churches, libraries, and such, trying to break Jim Crow. Dr. King joined them too, and there were even a number of us older folks who felt brave enough to get on board. We called ourselves Freedom Riders, and we filled cars and buses with white and Black folks and rode all over the place. This was a very dangerous thing, mind you. Those of us who were lucky were merely arrested and put in jail for a few days. But many others were beaten very badly by policemen and mobs of white townsfolk, and their buses and cars were burned. 3 years later, Ku Klux Klan members killed not only Black folks, but some of the white folks who were helping organize the movement and get Black folks registered to vote. And believe me when I tell you, that made everybody feel a little scared. But we kept moving forward like Dr. King told us. We've come too far to turn back now. There were other leaders in the movement like Philip Randolph, Malcolm X, Adam Powell, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Medgar Evers. But it was Dr. King who spoke loudest of all. His message was clear. We cannot win this battle with violence. We cannot win it with hate. We can only win it with persistence, love, and nonviolence, and by reminding the nation and people on Capitol Hill that our forefathers made a promise of freedom and justice for all when they signed that paper. We would become the nation's moral conscience and fight the battle for justice and equality. Dr. King marched us all over the South trying to get the attention of the whole country. We just loved him and would have followed him anywhere. When he spoke, his powerful voice gave you chills. It shook your spirit and got you excited and calmed you when you were scared. He was patient and took time to listen to everybody, even the children. And he was handsome too, honey, which didn't hurt one bit. In May of 1963, Dr. King and his team went down to Birmingham, Alabama, the most dangerous place in the South for Black folks. They went to work marching people all over the city and got everybody's attention when they marched 600 children through Kelly Ingram Park. Most were teenagers, but some were as young as 6 years old. They skipped school to march on downtown Birmingham, holding hands and singing. Policemen ordered them to stop and then sicked their dogs on them and sprayed them with fire hoses. That water was strong enough to knock the bark off a tree, and they turned it on the children. It knocked them down and ripped their shirts off, even pinned them up against buildings and trees. It was downright shameful. Pictures of the march were shown on television screens and in newspapers all over the world. President John F. Kennedy had no choice but to settle things in Birmingham. Later that summer, Dr. King, Dr. Philip Randolph, and several leaders in the movement invited people from all over the country to join them in Washington, D.C. for a peaceful demonstration on the Mall to try and pass a civil rights bill to promote civil rights and economic equality for Black people. Just about everybody I knew made the trip. We rode on a bus for hundreds of miles all the way to Washington. It was such a glorious day. We filed off the bus and joined a parade of people who were marching and singing, headed for the Lincoln Memorial, where great crowds of people were crammed together on the Mall. Black, white, brown, red, and yellow folks were everywhere. It seemed like the whole world had come. It was almost like a dream. Seeing so many people there made us realize we were not alone in the struggle for equality. There were several speakers throughout the afternoon, but what I remember most is when Dr. King spoke. His powerful voice rose and fell and echoed over a sea of people as he spoke about his dream for America. He shouted, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last." Dr. King roared. By the time he finished, people on the Mall were hugging and shouting and swaying and crying. It was a magnificent speech, and it felt like we all got a little church on that Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't that long before President Kennedy promised to send civil rights bill to Congress to guarantee equal rights to all American citizens, no matter what their color. He never got a chance to see it through, though. Just a few months later, he was shot and killed on a visit to Texas. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act the following year. The government had finally said to the world that Jim Crow was dead. The time had come, at last, when the words written by our forefathers that all men are created equal were honored by our government. It had taken hundreds of years, millions of lives, marches, martyrs, protests, wars, and much more for America to come closer than ever before to becoming what it was meant to be. Lord knows there were plenty more battles to fight, many more struggles and troubles to overcome, but at last the idea that everybody counts was within reach. It was a glorious victory for all Americans and the beginning of a new struggle for every American to ensure that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. So this concludes our story, Heart and Soul by Kadir Nelson. I hope that you have enjoyed this series. Again, I invite you to ask questions, reach out to the adults in your life and ask them more about the civil rights movement. Ask them about the lunch counter sit-ins. Ask them about Malcolm X. Ask them about, Angela Davis and the Black Panthers. They didn't even talk about the Black Panthers, and they were a group of people that they decided to change things in their community. So what they did was they had breakfast programs for kids. And they would go out and they would patrol the streets and make sure that it was safe for our people to do daily activities. And they were armed guards and they would try to protect our people. And they don't get enough credit for all of the great things that they did. There's so many Black people that have fought and died so that we could be where we are today. And they really deserve our respect and our admiration. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Kulture Kids Storytime, and you will tune in next time. Have a great one, guys.